Okay. All right, I can't move. That's going to really cramp my style. Joining us today is Mr. Robert Zimmerman, please. Robert, stand up, turn around. He is with Z Creative Communications. We also have Jeff Morosoff, Public Relations, Herbert School of Communication, and Boonghee Yu, also from the Marketing Department. What we're going to be going over briefly on a presentation, and then we really like to get some input from folks and some questions, is what's most important? Is it policy or is it the way candidates are promoted nowadays? Products are branded. You look at any of these brands up here, you see the golden arches, you know what that is. You know what, I say Starbucks, your eyes go right to that green symbol, don't they? You know what Apple is. Well, we're branding politicians the same way nowadays. They also have personalities. If I said luxury, what car brands would you look at? Yeah, are you going to be looking at Chevy or are you going to be looking at Porsche? Right? Well, we have found that politicians have certain brand personalities. And there's a ranking of what's important to most voters. Honesty is one of the most important things, all the way down to, are they exciting? In the last election, we did a little research and we found, okay, where do our different politicians side with regard to how people perceive their brand personality? What's interesting is, just to let you know, if I were asking Republicans, they thought at the time President Trump was highest on all these. If I was asking Democrats, they thought that now President Biden was highest on all these. It was the independents in between that shifted. And that's where you're really trying to get the brand to resonate with voters, okay? Not only do politicians want to brand themselves, they want to brand their opponents, okay? Low energy, crooked, weird. Why? Voters vote the brand. If you ask a lot of voters, what's the policy? They've never read the policy papers. Okay? Oh, sorry. Social media is becoming increasingly more important. It's convenient, it's social, I get to communicate with friends, it's entertaining. It confirms what I already believe. That's one of the biggest weaknesses to it. People go on to the sites to say what they want to hear. And it also bashes the opponents, which is important to people. But there's always a concern with fake news and censorship. Please confirm what I already know. Good information about my candidate is good. Bad information about your candidate is good. Bad information about my candidate, oh, that's censorship, that's fake news. That's the issue that's come up with social media. Who do you trust most online? Intimate, respected sources, family, friends, vets, religious leaders, business people. Next, media. Newspapers have presence online, don't they? Okay, scientists, of course, professors. We would trust them, correct? Daytime talk shows, neutral politicians, parties, PACs, not-for-profit. By the way, we didn't assign which news agency, which politician, anything like that. Because it becomes the mine are good, yours are bad type of mindset sometimes. You know, not yours, but my candidate is good, your candidate is bad. You know, the other candidate is bad. Okay? And who's the least trusted? Athletes, celebrities, social media influencers, late night shows. People don't trust them. One issue that keeps coming up, Americans want policies and solutions to be put on a bumper sticker or a baseball cap. Can you make your whole policy 4 words? That has influence. Now, we can argue, especially in the academic world, oh, this is terrible. People should read the policy statements. They're not. But then there are certain things like the Harris Waltz here. What do they have, a baseball cap? That's camouflage. Who are they reaching out to without directly saying that? Veterans, hunters, rural voters, okay? But this isn't new. We've had slogans around for a long time. I mean, you go all the way back to 1864 with Lincoln. Don't swap horses in the middle of the stream. They didn't have bumper stickers, but they had slogans. They just had to make it shorter when it became a bumper sticker or a baseball cap. So I'm not going to read all these, but if you know, one thing that I noticed is over time they got shorter and shorter. Okay, And we've always had these types of promotions. Some of them pro my candidate, or pro my favorite candidate, anti the other candidate. I like Ike. Rotten eggs with Roosevelt, omelets with Wilkie. Use of humor. Reagan, let's make America great again. Trump borrowed that, copied it, outright copied it. By the way, I want to thank Jeff. He provided a lot of these pictures for this. He's done research in this area and was able to get it. I also like this. In your heart, you know he's right. Same picture, in your guts, you know he's nuts. That's for Goldwater. I mean, they copy the same thing. They don't even try for originality. This is called plagiarism. You get in trouble, students, for doing this, but in politics, it's considered humorous. We're going to show this video of the young girl with the daisy, okay? Also, sometimes it's just repeating a name. Just to let you know, this is from John Kennedy's campaign. However, his nephew tried this, copied the same ad, ran it during the Super Bowl, and got in a lot of trouble. Okay? Scare tactics, nothing new. We'll talk about how that was utilized by George H.W. Bush. And I was shocked with this one, where Nixon, who was raised a Quaker, they say he's no Quaker, he's a faker. They bring in religion. I don't think you'd see that today. So over time, things have changed. President Obama looked out on hope, just a simple single word that captivated people, okay? And then, patriotism. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, during the times of the Great Depression and World War II, wanting him to stay and finish the job. He was elected how many terms? I hope my students all know that, yeah. Okay? Bumper stickers and baseball caps matter. Candidates are branded and voters buy the brand. And social media promotes confirmation bias. These are a lot of the things that are coming out about branding of candidates. Now, I'm going to try to switch over and get to the videos here. This was one of the
1, 2,
can you see all that? Or
3, 4, 5,
1964.
7, 6,
Cold War.
6, 8, 9, 9.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
These are the stakes. To make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other, or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd.
Now,
The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
that resonated because they were painting Goldwater as a warmonger. And that if he were to become president, he would be dropping nuclear bombs. Okay? Another one that was considered an extremely negative campaign. Now, I wish every politician never utilized negative campaigning. But we still have to examine it, that they do.
Bush and Dukakis
Bush
on
was
crime.
behind in
Bush
polls.
supports the death penalty for first-degree murderers. Dukakis not only opposes the death penalty, he allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton, who murdered a boy in a robbery, stabbing him 19 times. Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend. Weekend prison passes. Dukakis on crime.
That ad was credited with flipping the opinion of many people in the United States from Dukakis on over. Dukakis was branded as being weak on crime. Right. Now, This one I personally think can just, well, this can become the earworm.
Kennedy, 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 Kennedy.
Do you want a man for president who's seasoned through and through, but not so doggone seasoned that he won't try something new? A man who's old enough to know
And young enough to do.
well, it's up to you, it's up to you, it's strictly up to you.
Do you like a man who answers straight, a man who's always fair?
We'll measure him against the others, and when you compare, you cast your vote for Kennedy and a change that's overdue. So it's up to you, it's up to you, it's strictly up to you. Yes, it's Kennedy, 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 for me. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. Kennedy!
Who was that ad for? Okay, but if you listen to the words and you see the pictures are trying to depict people that you're trying to get to vote. The words are giving another message of, yes, he's young, which was a criticism because he was only in his early 40s at the time, but also experienced, and he was running against Richard Nixon, who was very experienced as vice president of the United States and all. By the way, if you ever get a chance, watch the tape. You don't have to watch the whole thing, of the 1960 presidential debate between Kennedy and Nixon. People who listened to it on radio said Nixon won. People who watched it on TV said Kennedy won. Couple reasons. Kennedy wore a dark suit. There was a light background. Nixon wore a light suit with a light background. It was black and white TV. He flickered out. He was out. He looked bleachy. You couldn't see him. Okay. Also, Kennedy gave short, concise answers. Now, there are times when optimism comes across. 1984.
Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
Just to let you know, Reagan had a horrible performance in a debate against Mondale. Go back and look at it, it was just terrible. And, you know, it was a multiple debates, but one of them was just incredibly bad, didn't impact his election campaign at all. Okay? What happened recently in history? That's how come these things are very important. Boonghee, you want to? Okay, so let me see. Try and open it. I'll get it. Okay, you're on. Okay. You clapping again? I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you very much for coming to this session. Okay, so we are a university. The university is for knowledge and knowledge understanding, knowledge creation. And so whatever phenomenon, we try to understand from academic perspective, which means science. So I'm in marketing department, and we are doing marketing science to understand what factors, create or cause, impact certain phenomenon. So this year is election year. So election, the people vote, and why do they vote? Well, what makes them to vote for certain candidate? So it is it's a very fascinating topic, and in every discipline, and especially in marketing, we are doing political marketing. So we have a PR and marketing and advertising, promotion. So all try to work to convince voters to vote for their the focal candidate. So this is a very that Shawn and I doing this for years, and it is quite interesting the topic. So the presidential election, and especially starting from the Trump, so that Trump was elected and then coming back. So it is overarching over the years. So as Shawn presented, we understand candidates are brands from the marketing perspective. So they are brands. So we are doing branding, and then we are creating brands and then manage and promote the brands or kill rival brands. And then we have a concept name called the brand date. So brand and candidate combined together. So that means we see candidates from the branding perspective. Okay, so we have a political candidate. So this candidate image is influenced by two major factors. The one is a political ideology. And this ideology is a complex phenomenon. Every individual voter has their own ideology, and also the candidate is representing his or her party. So this must be a good match between candidate party ideology and also the personal ideology, the possessions. Now the second component is media. So this ideology is a content that we must deliver this content to potential voters. So today, the biggest media is social media. So Shawn and I researched about these two phenomena, two causes, major causes affecting the voting behavior. The first one is the ideology, and what ideology is affecting positively or negatively each party candidate. And we researched 3 different time periods, starting from 2016, 18, and 20, and then this year it'll be quite interesting year too. So this table is from a regression analysis result, and I highlighted. The green one is common to both party candidates. Then red is good for Republican Party, and then blue is good for Democratic Party. So this is a summary of this previous table. And as you can see, both parties, GOP and Dem candidates, have a benefit by emphasizing on 2 elements. These are green ones. So longing for a better future. So emphasize on better future, and it works to both candidates. The second one is incumbent-based trust, so that incumbent will have an advantage in the election. And then the red ones, these red ones are quite interesting. The GOP candidate, and this time the Trump, has more support when he emphasized on, or when appeal to people who have this, the red ideology, and that is the first one, immigrants as a burden. Okay, so that's one very strong the element, and then the second one is a consumer ethnocentrism. So this is a ethnocentrism, but the consumer. That means the domestic things are superior to the imports. So the trade war and then the anti-globalism works for the GOP candidate. The third one is trust in the government form, which is like a constitution. So when you try to hold and no change and then promote the constitution, okay, will be beneficial to GOP candidate. But now look at the blue one. So which elements are good for Democratic candidate? And the first one is nostalgia. And Make America Great Again, it is kind of nostalgic approach. But in this Democratic Party, when you don't emphasize, don't say, and it's helping Democratic Party. So don't talk about the past, talk about the future only is helping. The second one is caring for immigrants. See, this is opposite to the GOP candidate. So you emphasize on caring for immigrants is helping Democratic Party candidate. So this is a kind of ideology aspect. Now how can we deliver this content to the voters, and how can you persuade them to vote for that party candidate? And this is a survey result for the Facebook, the activities. Okay? So in the Facebook is one popular the platform for both Democrats and Republicans. And as you can see, the Republican, the party members don't do much the social media. So in the social media is occupied by Democrats. So that's a normal phenomenon. But when we promote candidates in the social media, the number one element is the argument of strength. So you must, say when you do a promotion with a confidence and a strong argument, very clear argument. So that is a number one, factor affecting, the voter, the activities. And number two, that's information quality. And so the quality here is the content. So you are saying you are focusing on the ideology, and that works better than attacking the candidate personalities or any appearance the issues. Okay. So that's my presentation, and so we are approaching the understanding why and how people make a voting decision. Okay.
What I would like to do is, how do I raise the screen? Okay, you got it. All right, good. We're going to jump up here on the panel, and we would love to have questions from the audience. Okay? And, mics. I'm sorry. We would love to have questions from the audience. So please hit us with some. Hit us with some tough ones. And I'd like to point out that we have people from industry here, people from academia, across multiple schools, the School of Communication and the School of Business. So I would like to hear some very hard questions from our students.
Can I make a few comments before we get to questions, if that's okay?
Oh, please.
Sure. I think we have to be, this is on or not, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think you got to be very careful to not get caught up in false choices, which politicians love to do in political discourse. Branding and policy are not a conflict. The reason branding works is because it helps you, when it can work, is because it helps you address policy. If you see these commercials that were shown, for example, the daisy chain commercial where she's pulling off the daisies, and you see the nuclear explosion take place. If you see that, the reason that commercial worked is because you have to look at context. It was just a year before, or actually 2 years before, that the United States was terrified of a nuclear attack, literally a nuclear attack based in Cuba with Russian missiles. That was called the Cuban Missile Crisis. And Barry Goldwater, who was the leader of the modern Republican conservative movement, and a great patriot for that matter, and served with great distinction in the Senate, and was actually a champion, because he was a libertarian, of gay rights and abortion rights and the like. He was an interesting public figure. Barry Goldwater was saying incendiary, inflammatory things. He was speaking out against civil rights. He was saying incendiary things about Russia. He was scaring the country because of his many foreign policy statements. That's why that Daisy commercial works so well. If you look at the Morning in America commercial that Ronald Reagan, of the Reagan campaign, the context of it was he had run for president 3 times. He won the nomination in 1980. He assumed the presidency after the Carter presidency, where gas prices were sky high. There were enormous gas lines and rationing, and where there were hostages, American hostages being held in Iran. And the country was really in a very desperate panic strait at that time. So Reagan provided a concept of let's restore America's dignity, let's restore America's place in the world. And whether it was valid or not is an interesting debate, and that's what campaigns are about. But nevertheless, he spoke to the fears people had. And that elevated his candidacy. And of course, during his presidency, the economy did get better. Many respects because of the policies of Carter that finally took effect later on. But the bottom line is, he benefited from that moment. So it's so important to look at the Kennedy commercial, which was upbeat and sunny with a beautiful family. It was after 8 years of Eisenhower, who at the time was our nation's oldest president. The country had a rejuvenation of an economic boom, people moving to the suburbs. It was a changing time in America, not just generationally, but how we lived and where we moved to. And so that he spoke to that need in the country, and barely beat out Richard Nixon in one of the closest race in our nation at that time. So when you look at branding and policy, they're not a conflict. Branding helps highlight the policy messages that the candidate thinks will succeed with the voters. Branding helps highlight the concerns that the voters have and how policies can address those concerns. Sometimes they exploit fears. Sometimes they exploit division. But it's not a conflict. Branding. So we often get caught up in the notion of, well, candidates are like cornflakes or something. You just market them like cornflakes. It's a lot deeper than that, a lot more serious than that. So I just want to bring that point up to consider.
I'd like to pick up on a couple of things you said, Robert. The idea of policy versus branding versus the scare tactics. So, for example, let's go back to Kennedy. Kennedy's ad was very optimistic. It was positive. And that's essentially how he ran his campaign. He was new ideas, the new frontier was the branding, if you will, for Kennedy. And he was successful. But he barely won that election over Richard Nixon. Now, 4 years later, Kennedy, of course, the tragedy of Kennedy's assassination. Johnson is running on his own now for president against a conservative Republican, but again, very successful, Goldwater. The ad you saw, by the way, the Daisy ad, the infamous Daisy ad, ran once. It was considered so controversial that they wouldn't run it again. However, it achieved the publicity. It didn't need to run again because everybody talked about it for the rest of the election. And it succeeded in scaring the public into believing that Goldwater was dangerous. Just that ad, that image, and the continued rhetoric afterwards. So scare tactics and fear were used by the Johnson campaign to win that election, and they won it handily. Meanwhile, you go ahead a few years and you look at some of the campaigns that you saw, the George H.W. Bush ad. Dukakis was ahead in the polls by 16 points in August, 2 months before the election, 3 months before the election. And that ad and the continued barrage of ads making Michael Dukakis, who was governor of Massachusetts, to be weak on crime, worked, scared people. And George H.W. Bush won that election.
But I just want to say, it scared people because at that period of time,
yes,
crime was a major issue.
yes.
People, and we were witnessing that in New York recently in the governor's race, where people had very real fears. And the most important part of campaigning, and Democrats sometimes are slow to learning this, in my experience, I'm speaking as a Democrat, is you've got to get to where people are. You've got to understand what's on people's minds and respect their concerns. Talk to them where they are, not just respond to them with charts and graphs, but understand their concerns. The Bush campaign exploited the fears, misrepresented Mike Dukakis' positions, but he spoke to their concern. The Bush campaign spoke to those concerns in a very real way, and Dukakis was very slow and very inept in responding to that. We saw a recent example in New York State in the last gubernatorial race. There was great fears and concerns about crime. Crime had risen after the pandemic on virtually every level around the country, certainly in New York State. And the Democratic legislature with the governor put in, first it was signed into law by Andrew Cuomo, the concept of bail reform, cashless bail. And Kathy Hochul, as the governor, ran with that legislation and was not understanding the fears that people had. So many people in the Asian community experiencing being the target of hate crimes in the pandemic environment, stores being broken into, all of this, and it was tied to cashless bail. And the governor failed to address the issue of crime, and even though she was reelected in the suburbs and regions around New York State, she lost by landslide numbers. It took out 5 Democratic-leaning congressional districts, I know, because I was one of those nominees running for Congress who was taken out in that landslide. And so it's important to understand that you have to be where people are, understand where their concerns are, and then try to address them. And the governor addressed it more effectively. Might have been a different result, but she didn't address it. She focused on other issues.
Well, wouldn't you say that that is, in fact, the success of Donald Trump? Donald Trump has exploited people's fears and is addressing those fears where they are, the fear of crime, the fear of jobs being taken away.
I would say it's his failure. And I can jump into
Well, the one thing I want to harken back to is if you looked at Clinton and Trump, she never branded herself. She was so policy-oriented.
Yes.
She would give hour-and-a-half-long speeches on policy, but never created a brand of her own that stuck with her. And as a result, Trump branded her. And his branding of her stuck more than any branding she ever tried for herself.
I would say a little differently. I don't recall Hillary Clinton ever giving an hour-and-a-half speech on anything. She did
in West Virginia on how they were going to transition the coal mining industry or something, and people were like snoozing.
Remember, she won the popular vote by 3 million over Donald Trump. She lost the Electoral College, and there are many reasons for it. Donald Trump was brilliant, dangerously brilliant, at exploiting people's fears. We were going through an economic transition, and he, like any, frankly, effective demagogue, scapegoat people's fears to think it's because of the immigrant population, or China or another country taking workers' jobs, versus the fact we're going through an economic transition and there are new job markets that had to be opened up. There are a lot of reasons that demagogues come into influence and have a voice and have power. But I would say to you, to your point, I think look, there are many things that could have been done differently and better for her, without question. Her biggest problem was, quite frankly, that she was leading in the polls pretty consistently, but then when the FBI opened up an investigation into her and then shut it down a week later, that really brought her down. And that was one of the real problems.
And I think also, interestingly, from what I would consider what we study, she didn't listen to her customers. People were telling her, you got to come to Michigan, you got to come to Wisconsin, you got to come to Pennsylvania. And she's like, don't worry, it's the blue wall, we're safe.
Well,
she was not listening to her own people, and I think that's always an issue. Marketing is going and talking to people. Public relations is.
But getting back to the branding point about Hillary and Trump, think of it in these terms. When I ran campaigns locally years ago, if a candidate was unknown, one of our very first steps was to define that candidate. If it was our opposition, we would try to create a brand that was negative, if you will, to say, the folks out there don't know this person, we're going to educate them. And of course, you want to turn an unknown into a negative if you're running against that person. What Trump did, and Hillary was very well known, of course. She had been First Lady, she had been a senator.
Too well known.
Too well known, perhaps. Yeah. What did he do? Well, as soon as there was a first sign of a possible scandal with the investigation, he created Crooked Hillary. He branded her Crooked Hillary. And it worked. It was repeated over and over and over again. So those who may have had doubts about her started to see her in that light. He branded her. Mm-hmm. And in effect, changed her brand from this successful First Lady, politician, stayed in a difficult marriage, etc. She ended up losing the election. Even though she did win the popular vote, she ended up losing the election as a result.
I would take it a step further. 4 years later, he became one of the very, very few presidents in the history of our country who was voted out of office. We've only had, I think, 3 presidents who've lost a second term. And he did, and I think it's worth examining, I think it was, correct me, I think Herbert Hoover, George Herbert Walker Bush, and I think there may have been one other. But the point is, why did it fail? Why did Donald Trump endorse candidates fail? Mitch McConnell, the leader of this Republican leader of the Senate, said he would have been the majority leader, except for the fact that Donald Trump endorsed candidates got the nomination. He famously said you win the nomination with Donald Trump, but then you lose the election with Donald Trump too. And that's because, and it's an interesting point worth exploring, and we'll see what happens this year. To speak to mainstream concerns, I think more than anything else, people want solutions. They want problems solved. We have a crisis at the border, without question. We've got real problems. But people want to see solutions. And I think his failure to provide those solutions, in fact, I think has worked against him, both in his reelection, and I think it's worked against many of the Republican candidates who've run with him.
But I would ask my colleagues here, and you,
please.
Kamala Harris, Vice President of the United States, what's her brand? How is she branding herself? I don't really know the answer to that.
I watched the debate, mm-hmm. and I think her last 2 minutes, please, pardon?
Joy. That's her brand, joy. Okay.
Anybody else think there's another brand?
Anybody else?
Freedom.
Freedom. Mm-hmm. Stand up and scream it at us.
Scream
or
it
the microphone, you know.
She's more educated. Okay. Mm-hmm. Who else?
You had a hand up over there? You had a hand up? Yeah.
I also think she brands herself by saying that she came from a middle class environment with a single mother and trying to appeal herself to the common people, whereas Donald Trump being a billionaire kind of dissociates from.
But how do you put her upbringing, that brand that you just said, how do you put that on a bumper sticker?
Middle class.
Opportunity economy.
Mm-hmm. Opportunity economy, okay.
Yes. Please, yes, sir.
On social media, she's been utilizing a lot of modern kind of hip trends, so that's kind of entered social media.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's one in the back.
I feel yes. Okay.
They're short answers, so you're going to be moving a lot.
Okay. I feel like Vice President Harris has really taken the aspect of, okay, well, I'm different than any other presidential candidate that's ever been in the running before, so I'm going to use what I have and use social issues to essentially say, hey, this is what's going on, and putting the idea in people's minds in order to get them to vote for her. I would say, in a sense, she's kind of trying to manipulate her voters, but that's what everyone does, so.
One thing that no one's brought up which I think is what she's trying to put out as a brand, and I think we're seeing from this discussion, your great question, she's got a branding problem. But one thing she keeps hitting on the theme of, she represents the future, Trump represents the past. We're not going back. That's a constant theme of
That's
her
been the
messaging.
I think that's the whole branding joy, and I think that's the outward branding campaign theme. But when you see the surveys today, I think she's getting more votes from the women's side, and I think the number one the behind the factor is abortion issue. So that's a whole clear message to the women's women voters, and otherwise other things.
Well, there's more at stake for women voters, according to surveys and polls and my experiences. Abortion certainly is a very defining issue, but so is the economy, and so is family support.
She's far behind.
Yes, that's a problem for her. She is. It's interesting.
But she's failing to, appeal to the
That's
economic.
right. That's her challenges. It's funny. You look at this election, and you see things about her you like. You may see things about Donald Trump. Some concern me. Some you may like. And yet we are at a 50-50 state, or fairly close. Maybe she's up by 5 points. Some polls have her up by 3. And you have to wonder, why are we so polarized? Why are we so divided as a country? And that's something I think worth exploring.
Well, I think it's because the politicians and the news agencies make money by doing so, or win votes by doing so. The one thing that you say we're polarized and it's a 50-50, I can't think of the name for it, but somebody put the 7 states that are swing states and said, we're now a country of, and used those 7 sets of initials. Because there's only 7 states that matter. I mean, I really hate to say this. Nobody's really paying. When was the last time the politicians were campaigning in New York?
Well, Donald Trump did last week across the street.
But how often?
Right.
If you look at it, they're going to hit those 7 states 10, 20 times more than what they're going to hit New York or Utah or California or Wyoming or even Texas with all its electoral college votes, because they don't matter. That's a matter of what we talk about in our fields of location, location, location. 7 states matter.
But Shawn, that's intriguing. I saw somebody put up a graphic the other day on CNN that said that even Texas, which we all believe to be a solid red state, in the last election, Biden and Trump, 53% voted for Trump, but there was still 47 who voted for Biden. That's still, in my brain, close. And yet, the way the pundits look at it and the way the media has talked about these electoral-based elections, it really is only 7 states that matter. Does that mean that you really can't?
Let me make one editorial comment on this, with a special shout out to Roslyn High School. Okay, Roslyn High School's in the house. One of the very astute students said to me, well, New York doesn't count. It always votes Democratic. And I thought for a moment about that, and I said, don't fall for that for 2 reasons. Okay, when you go to vote, all of you go to vote. You're not just voting for president. You're voting for the United States Senate. You're voting for the House of Representatives. You're voting for your state legislature. Your vote counts in many ways. The majority of the United States Congress will probably be driven by what the votes are in New York. If we can pick up the seats that we lost in 2022 because of the Republican landslide. So when you're voting or your friends are voting, remember, even though you may not live in one of those 7 states, you have an enormous impact on who your state senator will be, who your assembly member will be, your House member will be. And we have very close races in New York, so please don't think your vote doesn't count. And get your friends, if they're getting absentee ballots, to fill out the application. And if they get the absentee ballot, make sure they fill out the ballot. So many people get the ballots into their home and never follow through on it. So just remember your votes count enormously, even if you're not one of the 7
I would like to open this up to questions from the audience, please. Dr. Bose?
Thank you. This is fascinating, the branding, and I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to stick to one, which is we've been talking about 7 battleground states, but I think 538 today has put Florida in there, which would be, I think, in some ways, maybe a little less surprising than Texas, but I guess my question is, what kind of branding could be effective, given that I think the last time Florida went Democratic was 2012 for Obama's reelection, right?
Well, first of all, 2 points. Nate Silver in 538 is one of the most incompetent polling operations out there. Don't bother with it. If you read it, take it with a grain of salt, okay? Just for perspective. And many of the polls you're going to read, and they're going to have a different poll every day, and they're going to say different things. You have to look at what they call the poll of polls, or the aggregate numbers that are published periodically. Just don't get too caught up in one particular poll, Nate Silver in particular. But what's driving Florida right now, as you made reference to, is the abortion issue. There's a resolution on the ballot in Florida, I think, saying you have to have an abortion within 6 weeks, which has been highly motivating for so many voters to come out to vote. And there's a reaction to the extremism from the anti-abortion movement and the extreme right wing that is motivating it.
I'd like to make a comment on polling, and this always shocks me. Boonghee and I do political marketing research, and sometimes I see political polling, and I say, we asked 512 people. And we're like, our paper would be rejected from any journal if we only asked 512 people, but they're trying to tell us what a state of 25 million people think off of asking 512 people. Do me a favor, young folks. When you're out there and you're looking at somebody who does a poll or tells you any type of statistics, the first question I always ask is, how many people did you poll and who did you poll? Mm-hmm. I'm willing to bet if I did a poll right now in this classroom, or I'm sorry, in this room, do I have a representative group from the United States? No, I'm looking at, no offense, the age is skewed a little bit down, isn't it? Do I have a representative group of those who are voting? I always get on my students' cases. I hear you talk about politics a lot. I'll ask the week after the election, who voted? I'm not asking who you voted for. Not my business. Did you vote? Well, I was busy that day. Old people vote. Okay? I'm sorry. You look at the statistics, you look at the numbers. I want more of you voting. Get together, go in a car together. Go out to your lunch afterwards. But I want you voting.
Back
okay,
to,
question in the back.
If we have, go ahead.
Back to Mina's point about the Florida issue, but this is a very, when you try to win in certain state or county, we must have some localness. So we talk about the federal issues, but local has different ones. Like here, Hofstra is in Nassau County. Nassau County is pretty much a Republican when you see the voting result, and as Robert can witness, I think. So the presidential campaign must have the universal issues and plus local issues. But interestingly, when you say one thing for one state, it may be against the other state. So I think that's kind of a dilemma. Yeah.
Do you think that people not turning out to vote unless people is really impacting the candidate's campaign and their marketing? How are they changing it to get people to turn out is my kind of question.
How are we inspiring people to vote? Yeah. How are politicians inspiring people
to vote? How are the
vote?
Candidates, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think what we said before, first of all, the fear tactic alone. If people are really afraid of something and believe that one of those candidates is going to fix the problem, that's motivating. Because if it affects me and this person's going to help me, I will vote for that person. But again, that's becomes an issue because everybody has different priorities. So if my priority is I'm concerned about losing my job to perhaps an immigrant who has gotten over the border illegally, I know who I'm going to vote for. But if I'm more concerned about who's making the decision about my pregnancy, or my daughter's pregnancy, or my wife's pregnancy, I'm going to vote for the other person. It's really how it affects me. Really comes down to that. how does this election affect me, and who's going to represent what I'm concerned about, what I'm afraid of? And that's, I think, the ultimate motivator. But why do 40 or 30% of Americans stay home in a presidential election and not vote? I'll let my colleagues answer that question, because I don't know.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, you look at voter turnout, so much of it is driven by what's at stake for the election, how the election is covered by the media, and how the candidates speak to those concerns. For example, we will have in this presidential year, I would think on Long Island, perhaps a 60% or more Democratic turnout, and perhaps a 60% or more Republican turnout, a very high turnout on both sides. And that, of course, affects the results dramatically. In 2022, we had a 48% of the turnout Democrat, 48% Democrat, 64% Republican. And that was because the issue in that year was the issue of crime, and there was a reaction towards interest rates going up, in particular, and the economy facing inflation and gas prices going up. And so you had a reaction that in many ways discouraged Democrats and frustrated Democrats, and Republicans were on the attack. And Democrats didn't respond, in particular in the governor's race, didn't respond effectively to those attacks. And the top of the ticket always drives the agenda. It's a situation that's the top of the ticket really dictates, in many ways, what the topic of conversation is, dictates the news cycle, whether it's for president or governor or another office. So in many ways, that impacts the turnout. But it's up to every candidate on the ballot to understand what the public's concerns are and speak to those issues as effectively as they can and try to break through.
You know, two things I want to bring up. One, I had an uncle that I used to argue with a lot about politics, and it was over this. He said that none of it matters. He was a college-educated individual who just didn't feel it was necessary to vote. It didn't matter. His vote didn't matter, didn't count, doesn't care. And I was like, Uncle Jerry, how can you think like that? So he was part of that 30% or so that just never went, never knew him that took a vote. It'd be like 2 days after the election, he'd be saying, who won? You know what I mean? It just didn't affect his day-to-day life, and he didn't care, which was infuriating to me. I mean, just absolutely infuriating. I mean, I would fight with him. Please, just go and vote.
It's also wrong, too. It's also
that was
categorically false.
Okay, yeah, I agree. And I said, how about a local thing? I said, you go fishing, you got a property tax, you got this. How about just vote in your local life? Nah, don't worry about it. You know. The other thing I want to point out is, if you look back on political campaign speeches 20, 30 years ago, you'd had the candidates standing up here like, or sitting up here like we are standing. You look nowadays, they have a crowd of people behind them. Who's that crowd of people? Those people are handpicked for the purpose of getting someone that out in the audience who could identify with those individuals. Oh, look, there's a person wearing a baseball hat. Oh, I wear a baseball hat. Oh, there's someone who's wearing a T-shirt that says this. I support that team in this area.
Or it's showing diversity of population.
That was my next one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the Reagan commercial, Morning in America, which was a beautiful commercial and motivating and very successful. If you notice in that commercial, everyone's white. That would never happen today.
Right.
You'd have a broad diversity. That's a very healthy trend, a broad diversity of people speaking to the diversity of our country. But just to follow up on what your uncle said, I mean,
it was horrible.
It's so important to remember, and I think the past 4 years have demonstrated just how critical your vote is. Who you send to Congress, who you send to the Senate, who you send to your state legislators, who you choose as president, certainly. You look at the policy changes we face, you look at the divisions we have in our country, you look at the challenges we have and the choices we have. And obviously, look, I'm a Democratic National Committee member. I'm a former candidate. I have won and lost, but I can tell you, I'm not speaking as a partisan. I'm truly not. When you have Dick Cheney joining with Democrats saying Donald Trump's a threat to democracy, that's something I think worth reflecting on and thinking about. And so I think you have to understand, these candidates have an enormous impact in your life, your personal freedoms, your economic opportunities, your educational opportunities. And I think it's very, very important to remember just how critical your vote is, and we've learned, if nothing else, we've learned that this past 4 years.
Back to the question, why do people vote? There are two reasons, obviously, right? The one is for my like a future and my positive, issues. The other one is for to prevent, something bad happening to me. So it's a negative side. I think the negative side is much bigger reason motivating people for voting. And for example, I want to have a good economy, good, democracy, but that is sometimes you think that may be selfish, right? But something bad happening to me, and then this generation, it must be stopped. So I think that way, negative campaign works much better than positive campaign, and so yeah.
But you also have to look at what's behind the branding. So let's look at very local situation. All of you in this room are familiar with this. If the Nassau County Republicans' brand was economic development, more jobs, well, what's behind that brand? What does that mean if you elect them to office? Now the Republicans are in charge of the county legislature and the county executive, and what's going to happen, President Poser, right next to Hofstra? A casino. That's because their brand was economic development. They were elected to office. They have the power to say, we're going to allow the building of a major casino next to 2 colleges. Now,
and a high school.
The Democratic Party must say that.
Right, but you have to look at the brand. You have to look beyond the brand, is what I'm saying. They have branded themselves as the leaders in economic development. Well, what does that really mean? What's going to be the result of that? If that's what we're voting for, it's nice on a bumper sticker, but what's going to be the result? How is it going to affect me, or the place that I go to school, or the neighborhood I live in? And that's why local politics is so important too, because you may be voting, you may not think that it's consequential to vote for a school board member or for a county executive, but it makes a difference.
I would like to open up, please, I want some questions from people. I think they're going to hand you a microphone.
I know we're pontificating here now. It's time for you to talk.
Hi, thank you for letting me ask a question. I love to talk.
Stand up.
Stand up?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Tell us your name and your major.
Okay. Oh my God, wait, all my stuff. Can you hold this? Can you hold this too? Sorry. I'm just getting my...
Okay, don't
say.
Okay,
Yeah.
there we go.
Okay.
I'm ready to go now. Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm a senior. I'm a marketing major here. And I am one who pays attention to branding. I love politics, weirdly enough. No one my age ever says that. But thank you for all of your perspectives and opinions today. I appreciate it. And my question would be, I see your passion, and I heard some key words that are contributing to my question. Do you think that personal opinions and of people and personal values and morals guide people to see politicians for more of their character rather than their policy? I feel most people in this room, or anyone my age, would rather focus on who they are as a person. And I feel, especially in this election, certain candidates filter themselves and change themselves for their audience. Others just can't speak for themselves whatsoever. Do you think that more and more people are starting to kind of forget the policy aspect and more so pay attention to the characteristics of things rather than focusing on what's really important?
I think it's a false choice to make it either or. Bill Clinton famously said, before they vote for you, they got to want to listen to you. They've got to respect you. They have to like you. So to your question, I think the values an individual projects, the sincerity the individual projects, is essential for them to get your attention. You may find you sometimes may vote for a candidate. You're not going to agree with any candidate on everything. You may not agree with a candidate on a lot of things. But if you trust that candidate's sincere about getting solutions and getting results, that might give you confidence in them. if you think they are going to speak sincerely about issues you're passionate about, that may get your attention and support as well. So I think character matters enormously, and your judgment of their sincerity matters enormously.
But what's interesting, Robert, is that if you watch some of the interviews, they'll send a reporter to a Trump rally and ask, well, what do you think of him in terms of what the things he says versus his policies. And very often you're hearing from Republicans, well, I don't like a lot of the things he says. I wish he would kind of tone it down a bit, but I'm voting for him anyway because he's going to fix the border or because he's going to lower inflation. So the personality and his background and his years of issues, whether they're personal or professional issues.
Because, Jeff, they think he's sincere.
They think he's sincere.
They think he's sincere about it.
And that he cares about them.
Yeah.
And he cares about them.
I think that the marketing can brand any candidate, any brand the product, but the product is not human, right? So we can, McDonald's, we can brand the McDonald's, but McDonald's has no opinion about that. I mean, the brand itself. But political candidate as a brand is a human. So we think of, the character matters actually, but there is a branded character and then real character. I think the voters are smart enough to distinguish between them. So during the campaign time, election time, we see certain, branded image and character. But now after elected, will that, that the winner keep the same character or change?
Good example is Lyndon Johnson. He was elected as the anti-war candidate in 1964. He was standing up to Goldwater on irresponsible or dangerous foreign policies. He was then driven out of office in 1968 because of his escalation of the Vietnam War and the way that war was being managed. So I think that's you can certainly change your position about someone's candidacy or presidency.
We have a question.
Yeah.
Young lady.
Hi, my name's Brianna Neff. I'm a freshman public relations major here at Hofstra. And a big point I kept seeing during the presentation was that Americans don't want to look beyond the brand. They want a brand that can fit on a bumper sticker or like a hat. But a big, one of the hottest topics in this election this year has been Project 2025, which is entirely policy. So what do you make of that? And do you think that policy matters more to Americans than we might think?
Let me just ask a question. I don't know this answer, so I'm asking. Does anyone know what percentage of people have downloaded and read that?
Probably not.
Have you read?
No, me, I did.
But I
kept hearing about it, so I found it online, I downloaded it, and I started reading it.
But Shawn, I think what the Harris campaign has done, the Democrats have done effectively, is they've branded the Republicans with Project 2025. And as much
three hands
right,
over
and as much
here.
as Trump has tried to back away from it, they have created that association. And in people's minds, they believe that is the Republican platform.
How many of you have heard of Project 2025?
Good.
Oh.
Very good.
Okay. How many of you think it's a good thing? Ooh. So I think Democrats have done a pretty good job of branding it.
But I'm just curious, how many of you read it?
All right.
You don't have to read it. You have to react to it. That's what counts. You're reacting to it.
It's called branding.
Reacting without reading?
Who had their hands up? Okay, go ahead. Excellent.
All right. So my question is, do you think the influence of celebrity endorsements of candidates is enough to sway younger voters into actually showing up to the polls?
You mean Taylor Swift?
Well, Taylor Swift as an example, but yes.
Anybody?
Oh, I can tell you it has an enormous impact. It gets people's attention. Maybe it motivates people to register to vote. Maybe it inspires people to watch the campaigns a bit more closely. It certainly can be very helpful. I mean, it depends who the celebrity is, of course. Some celebrities are more controversial than others, and you've got to be mindful of that.
But if you look at the numbers of people who went to the site to register after Taylor Swift posted, it's remarkable. Whether or not they actually become voters, we'll see. But it was remarkable the initial impact that she had.
I'm sorry, I was just recently hiking in the Canadian Rocky Mountains, and I saw 4 people with Kansas City Chiefs baseball caps. And I said, isn't that Taylor's team? Isn't that how we're thinking about it now? She's now associated with that brand. She has now associated herself with a political brand also.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Bella. I'm from Roslyn High School. I was wondering, do you think if we had a more moderate Republican candidate, the election would be, the closeness of the race would be a little different? Like Nikki Haley, for example?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think because Donald Trump is a polarizing figure, you either love him or you really dislike him. It has created that split even more so, and within the Republican Party too. So if you had a moderate Republican, if Nikki Haley had been the candidate running against Kamala Harris, that would have been really interesting, okay? Because now you have 2 women running on both major tickets. That would have been really interesting, and it might have been would have been a very different.
But the same story goes to Kamala Harris. She is known to be the most leftist policymaker.
Well, she was branded that way. I don't know if that was actually true.
Measure up with positions.
So yeah, it's a branding again. That's a public image she has. Yeah. So if Democratic Party is elected selected another candidate, probably the same story goes to.
With all due respect, I think it's a very important distinction to draw between talking points and image and reality. Now, the Republican talking point is she's far left. That's the message against every Democrat. They're far left. They don't want to have borders. They don't want to have, they're pro-crime, whatever you might say it is. And I think this is where sometimes I think the media has an important role to play, and they don't play that role in terms of fact-checking. All too often, the media serves as stenographers. They write down the Republican side, the Democratic side, without digging deeper and fact-checking and learning about what the reality is of the candidates and their positions. I think the candidate that's going to succeed, I think in this election in particular, is going to talk about results. You can be for border security and be humane. You don't have to separate children from their parents at the border. You can be tough on law and order, but also be thoughtful about dealing with issues of criminal justice and reform. So there are a lot of factors that go into it, and I think people are looking for solutions more than looking for a left or right philosophy in this election, hopefully.
Okay. Yes.
Wouldn't you say that people, based on the current candidates right now, that people want more extreme candidates and people sway to these, like you said, solutions, that they don't want somebody who's going to be in the middle and moderate. They want someone to make.
I think that you're bringing up an interesting point. I think the people in the parties want that. One of the most interesting things right now is the number of registered independent people who call themselves independent is greater than either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. Both parties have lost people. And I often wonder if it was possible and if there was enough money, a third party could really take hold in the country right now. But I'm not sure what it would represent.
There's an old cliche, and you hear it from politicians all the time. The left controls the Democrats, the right controls the Republicans. I can tell you, one thing I'm seeing more and more of is that, at least from my perspective as a Democrat, we want to be able to win. And we want to be able to win by choosing a candidate who can speak to the middle. In my primary, when I ran for Congress, I was outspent by about $800,000. But I was defined as a mainstream candidate, and that gave me a lot of credibility for the primary process. I think more and more mainstream Democrats are emerging successfully. And I think if Republicans, like you pointed out before, a Nikki Haley would have much more appeal for the broad middle if she were the nominee. I think people are looking for that right now.
Other questions?
Do you think that Trump, I feel like, I don't know if there's a term for over-branding, but definitely he's over-branded himself. And do you
Always. He's been doing it for 40 years.
Do you think that has,
if you take it farther, made us as a nation kind of look like a joke. Like, I think that overbranding and taking it and making it unserious, like him as a president, just because he's done that overbranding, like people have bobbleheads of him, like sold in gas stations. Like, that's a little ridiculous.
Well, he sells Trump steaks and he sells Trump
tennis shoes.
Right.
When you say over branding, it sounds like over sugar coating. But people are interested in the content, not the the cover skin. But I think today's Trump is like Hillary Clinton 2016. He's now too well known, so there's no much people see who he is, but Kamala Harris, people have no idea yet, so people want to know about her better, but she's not speaking.
We also have to remember that Donald Trump is a master brander. I mean, he has used that name to his financial benefit for many, many years.
He's a businessman. Yeah.
He is a businessman. And the fact of the matter is, some of the buildings that you have seen with his name on it, they're not his buildings. He licensed his name to be attached to the building, so it became a Trump building, but they were not buildings that he built. And that is what he has depended on, the Trump name, to build businesses. In some cases, some of those businesses failed, but the Trump name was a brand itself. And in his mind, it continues to be.
In many of those buildings, he doesn't even manage. He just licensed the name. He
Right.
didn't build, he doesn't manage, he has nothing to do. But
And
you
many
get
of
to
those
put his
buildings,
name on it.
the co-op owners and the residents have voted to take his name off the buildings.
Right.
You guys ever hear of Elvis Presley? The Room? Phenomenal star, right? Captured America's fascination. Then he had a comeback, got a lot of attention. By his third act, he was Fat Elvis, and people were just done. Donald Trump now in his third run for president is Fat Elvis. We've seen the act.
Fat Elvis, who might win an election, though.
Well, let's see. We've seen the act.
We've
heard the promises.
Yes.
That's a good comparison.
Hi, my name's Ethan. I go to Roslyn High School. I'm in 12th grade. A brand that's been associated with Vice President Harris throughout the campaign is that she's Biden. She's going to carry on like policies that Biden had in place. And I bet we could agree that the Biden campaign has had problems with the economy and with immigration. So how do we feel Vice President Harris will be able to stem off from Biden and create her own campaign that's better with these issues?
One thing I'd like to point out, I've been watching this. How many times have you seen Biden next to Harris on a campaign stop? Once in Pennsylvania, where he was born, I think in his hometown. I think they are purposely keeping him in D.C. for that very reason. She is separating her brand.
It's a very good question.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting strategic question, too. Because if you look at the economic accomplishments of the Biden presidency, for the first time lowering the cost of prescription drugs for seniors, something we've talked about for decades, and it got done. Record job growth of 16 million jobs, 6 million more post-pandemic recovery. If you look at infrastructure, the largest infrastructure bill since Eisenhower, or the reinvestment of domestic manufacturing, creating semiconductor chips.
CHIP Act.
The CHIP Act. Bipartisan gun safety legislation. You hear Kamala Harris talk about the economic accomplishments without mentioning Biden. And that those poll well. Where she is certainly hurting is on inflation and on the, even though one would argue prices and the stats show prices are coming down, it's still too high. And on the border. So she has to separate herself and show how she's going to do things differently to address inflation and the border and what type of results she's going to get to. And there are ways she can do that, but that's, to your point, that's her challenge.
We had a question?
Yes?
Yes?
It's on.
Oh, okay. Hello, my name is Dorcas. I'm a graduate student. So my question actually is, how do you think the trends that we've discussed here today could affect like the future political campaigns and, the voters' engagement?
In terms of branding, I think you'll see more of it. You have a social, the folks at Roslyn have to go back to school, I guess. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you, Roslyn.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for being here.
Well, one of the things we haven't talked about, Dorcas, is we haven't talked about social media's effect on branding. And you have but I think the fact is social media, we know, is here to stay and will continue to increase as a resource and if not a source of our media consumption. So how do we brand using social media in more effective ways? I think that's what you're going to see more and more. And you're seeing it now, of course, but you're going to see more of a concentration on the very short messaging that social media and its environment forces us to create. Memes, slogans, photographs. The problem is, of course, now with AI becoming more and more part of our lives, how much of that will be real and how much will that be fake? So that's the precaution that has to, or that's the caution that we have to abide by.
Or how much people are going to use AI to come up with new ideas.
Exactly.
How do I appeal to AI? How do I appeal to voters in Erie, Pennsylvania, Erie County, Pennsylvania, which is a major swing county? Erie it's been sometimes the predictor of how Pennsylvania grows.
Did you have a follow-up question?
Yes. Because speaking about social media, like almost all of us in this room get our information from social media. So like, what advice would you give us students here who want to like critically assess the information we consume about like candidates on social media?
Stop reading social media. Your question terrifies me. It terrifies me. If you wonder why we have polarization in our country, why we have polarization in our communities on the most basic issues, it's because we can't agree upon basic facts. We form opinions, oftentimes based upon political prejudices, based upon false premises, and it can be driven by any number of different, there's no just discussion based upon a factual analysis. And I've seen that played out locally. I've seen it on many local issues in this county. I've seen it played out nationally. And that's what is most concerning, because social media, we've never had more opportunities to fact check information. You can go to your phone and fact check virtually anything. AP, Associated Press, has a fact check. Washington Post does. New York Times does. The Wall Street Journal does. And I'm dwelling on this too much, and I'm sorry, but the reason I say this is people who read that a fact may prove them wrong come back and say, well, that's a left-wing source, or that's a right-wing source. And they don't even accept the facts on the fact checkers because it goes against their prejudice. And that is
frightening,
horrifying for our democracy, horrifying for legitimate public discourse.
Yeah, definitely. The social media was supposed to be a very positive tool for democracy. But ironically, it is killing democracy because we don't know anymore the common ground, the knowledge or facts. So in social media, we have a function of following and
sharing,
blocking.
Blocking.
So we are blocking,
liking,
sharing. The many people who don't agree, with us. So we are fortifying and strengthening our own view, not buying or not checking, the opposite, arguments, whether it's facts or not.
I was with the mayor of Warsaw last Sunday, and he is an academic, and he put in place a curriculum for their school system to teach young people how to discern between falsehoods in social media and reality, facts. I can't think of a more important topic to teach.
There's a course, Professor Semple. Let's introduce that course. Robert to teach it.
No, I'm good, thank you.
Hold on, I just got the sign that we have actually gone overtime.
Oh, have we?
I want to say thank you. We were able to go overtime because we had so many questions from the audience, which I see as a positive. I think a couple of us might be hanging around up here for a few minutes if anybody wants to come up. but I think I have to release the students to go off to their classes. And the president is giving the State of the University speech.
At 1 o'clock. Yeah.
You should be attending. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much to our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.